Well, this one is actually, well, it's relevant to everybody, but it's especially relevant to Chloe and Antigone. I'm basically talking about two different personality types, the INTJ and ISFJ.
Oh yeah, good point.
And so we have two INTJs here and an ISFJ here, so we'll see.
Are you also recording?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good.
All right, so essentially this project is talking about how different these two personality types process emotions differently. And I talk about the relativity mental model in the beginning because to kind of just make it more broadly applicable to everyone. Essentially, the relativity mental model explains that an observer cannot truly understand a system of which he himself is a part. For example, a man inside an airplane does not feel like he's experiencing movement, but an outside observer can see that movement is occurring. And I guess I use this as a parallel to understanding ourselves because who we are is a system and we are a part of the system of ourselves. And because of this, it's very difficult to understand ourselves. And I kind of use this as a way to talk about why understanding other people is actually a great way to understand ourselves because you're having some sort of contrast. You're understanding another system or another human being, which can provide more information and more, I guess, understanding around who you are. So now to jump in, what is the MBTI? Essentially, the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator is a self-report questionnaire, essentially designed to indicate certain psychological preferences in how people perceive the world and make decisions, or what I like to call them is natural tendencies. And so it categorizes individuals into 16 personality types based on four dichotomies: introversion versus extroversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. And so you can take the test at this link. I have other projects kind of diving more into what these types mean. So does Chloe, actually. She has a project talking about these two. Next, I talk about cognitive functions. This is kind of a more nuanced way of looking at traits, which I thought was very insightful, and I hadn't really heard much about it. And so essentially what these are is they have these cognitive functions have like these I guess like main functions, and then they're called primary dominant functions, and then auxiliary functions. And it kind of differs between kind of how those functions actually like play out, I guess. If you look at some of these, for example, extroverted sensing is focused on the external environment and experiences living in the present moment, versus introverted sensing is relying more on past experiences in the internal recall of sensations and impressions. And so there's a lot of these different cognitive functions that are outlined here, which I thought were really interesting. There's also a few other ones that I can mention, like extroverted intuition is like seeing possibilities, and then introverted intuition is more like internal insights and kind of having your own vision for something. And so there are also judging functions such as extroverted thinking, making decision based off of logic, objective criteria, organizing the external world. And then introverted thinking is more seeking like internal consistency and logic, so focusing on understanding concepts for their own sake. And then lastly, there's extroverted feeling, where you make decisions based off of external values and the feelings of others, striving for harmony. And then there's introverted feeling, where you're focusing more on your personal values and feelings, making decisions on what feels right internally. And so this can make a big difference in how these functions play out. So for example, the INTJ has a dominant introverted intuition, but then auxiliary extroverted thinking. And so this means that INTJs primarily perceive the world through internal insights and visions, but then make decisions based on logical structures and efficiency. And then opposed to the ISFJ, who have the introverted sensing and extroverted feeling, where ISFJs primarily perceive the world through past experiences and a rich sense of internal memory, and then make decisions by considering the feelings of others and maintaining harmony. So I thought that was really interesting. But essentially, this leads to differences in emotional handling. And so INTJs are characterized by their primary cognitive function, introverted intuition. And this combination fosters a natural inclination towards analyzing and systematizing the external world, including their emotions. And so generally, INTJs will seek logical explanations for their feelings and trying to resolve them by addressing the root causes. Essentially, when they're thinking about feelings, they're like, there's a problem, I need to solve it, using logical, processes to do so. So for ISFJs, on the other hand, with introverted sensing and extroverted feeling, this orientation predisposes ISFJs to value harmony and emotional connection. So they kind of internalize their emotions very deeply. And this encourages them to have a detailed recall of past experiences, which can also lead to another thing that Chloe talks about. It can be like a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle where they're looking for validation for their feelings, which can kind of perpetuate negative emotions as well as positive emotions. And so there are certain reasons for these differences. The INTJ's framework tends to be a more like future-oriented problem-solving approach. And then for ISFJs, that can be emphasizing more on like emotional connection, personal history, just being more like introspective. And so these can have both positive and negative impacts. For INTJs, this can really help them prevent them from becoming overwhelmed by emotions and just like focus on how do I solve this problem. But then they can also have them struggle with fully experiencing and processing their emotions, and also can lead to kind of emotional detachment, which could hinder relationships. For ISFJs, the positive is that their deep emotional processing can really help them be empathetic with others and have a much more like deep understanding of their emotional states. But then they can also become overly fixated on negative experiences or emotions, and then just kind of having a reinforcing cycle of negative validation. And so lastly, I kind of talk about how these two types can kind of learn and support each other. INTJs can learn from ISFJs how to, value emotions and expressing your emotions, feeling your emotions, and then also to kind of learn to appreciate tradition and past experiences. For INTJs who are often more focused on like the future and innovations, that can be something that they often miss. And then also focusing on practical support, where ISFJs are naturally inclined to offer practical support to those in need. And so there can be some things learned, like how do you tangibly, provide gestures of support to those around you. And then for ISFJs, it can help to learn about, strategic thinking and future planning and objective problem solving. Really, how do you resolve these internally, and kind of sometimes it makes sense to detach yourself from your emotions if there's a root problem going on that you just need to figure out, like what's the plan to solve the problem and then execute on it. And then otherwise for that, everyone can help each other in emotional processing by just giving you space to share and support, and validation, and also challenging you if need be, because that's also help. Like the best friends aren't always just going to validate you. They're also going to tell you when they think you're wrong, which is also very helpful as well. And so in conclusion, the human brain is the most complicated system we know of, and it's kind of ironic how such a complex creation can't really even understand itself. And it's because of that, it's easy to trick ourselves into thinking that we know who we are, but we really don't. And so this is a big reason why I'm fascinated by personality types, is because they are in and of itself a mental model for understanding who we are in relation to others. And so that's not to say that they can tell us who we are, but part of the reason why I think it's very important for kids to learn about it is because it kind of introduces a possibility that none of us know who we are. None of us can tell us who we are, but it's helpful to, understand that so we can try to understand ourselves better. So thank you for listening to my presentation.
That's so great. Oh, One of the first things that I learned when I was starting that marriage blog that turned into Weequal was like, I was reading all these books and it was like, wow, there's so many repeated challenges in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, my thinking before was that it was just us. It was like, there's so many patterns in this that these are solvable problems.
Yeah.
These are so, and almost all of them basically at the end of the day came down to failures to recognize that the other person is perceiving reality differently. And so it's actually totally illogical and just a big waste of time and energy to react with frustration and anger and dismissiveness, because that's like the only hope really that we have, is to have relationships where we can be honest and open enough to learn from these different perceptions to see our own blind spots. And the embarrassing thing is that other people see those blind spots that you don't see by definition, right? It's like everybody we know has certain things that they do over and over and over again where it's like, is that person even aware? The answer is probably not. They're just sitting there over and over again.
We have there's a question that we use in coaching, which is, what are you making that mean? What do you make that mean? And it's just an interesting way of asking, because you shouldn't assume that what you're seeing is fact. Your brain is interpreting it as fact. And so that's always been a nice, it can be a jarring question sometimes to somebody who is not familiar, right? Because it forces you to acknowledge that you are interpreting something.
Mm-hmm.
That the other person, right? It's not all fact. How are you interpreting it? Yeah.
It's very difficult for people to understand that just because they feel something, that may not mean that it's true at all.
Right.
Okay, so that brings up, Antigone, do you want to comment on that? We've been talking a lot about the difference between like emotion, what we feel versus facts and the why, and that's complicated, man. That's so tough. Like, what is true?
Yeah, I guess I can speak a little to that. So we established that even though it feels like we're experiencing objective reality, the truth is it's all subjective and through the lens of our own personal paradigm. And that reality itself is infinite. So seeking new perspectives is essential to kind of broaden that reality. I'm not sure what else I can say, but
Well,
yeah, that's my.
The one thing, specifically with regards to that comment just now that Dallas made, who, in case you don't know, he's a genius superhero who was helping guide Sumay before the Scripps interview that comes out tomorrow. Oh yeah. So at least one thing that we talk a lot about over here is the idea that what you're actually experiencing, your emotions that you're feeling, that is true in the sense that you are perceiving that emotion as a human, right? If I'm angry, then I may be the only one that can perceive it. So it may not be objectively true in the sense that people can prove it, but I can know personally that I am feeling angry or tired, right? But whether or not, but the reason why I'm angry or tired, now that gets complicated. Trying to figure out the root cause behind emotions, I feel like that's when things get really tricky. Does that make sense, Dallas? Are you trekking with me?
Yeah, there's people experience different realities. I think Antigone said something about that. But one of the things that I find fascinating about emotions is that they're chemicals. Every emotion you feel is a chemical.
I made the project about this 100%.